live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the episode Arena. Now, this is one of the episodes, there's a somewhat widespread conception of the original series of Star Trek as having very low quality costumes, aliens, special effects, etc., etc. Arena is one of the episodes that contributes to that. As we've got the character of the Gorn, who's an alien that Kirk is forced to fight on this particular planet. It's a rubber lizard suit. It doesn't look fantastic. So, oftentimes when people think about the low quality of Star Trek's costumes, props, etc., etc., this is the kind of thing they're thinking about. That being said, the episode itself is actually somewhat interesting. So basically what happens is the Enterprise comes to an Earth outpost called Cestus 3. They beam down, they find that it's been destroyed, they get attacked by another ship, and then Kirk and the landing party get beamed back up to the ship with the loss of a red shirt. Just standard operating procedure. So they get beamed back up. The Enterprise, Kirk asserts emphatically that the only possible reason for this unknown alien to destroy Cestus 3 was for invasion. Spock is kind of like, maybe there's actually a bunch of other possible reasons, and Kirk is like, no, it's invasion. At which point Spock is like, okay, you're the captain, I guess. So then Kirk pursues the alien vessel with the intention of destroying them, because if it's an invasion and if they get back to their home territory, then presumably that will be green light for that invasion. So Kirk decides they're going to destroy this alien ship. So they pursue, They come relatively close to a planet that starts scanning them, presumably also scanning the alien ship. And then the alien ship stops. The Enterprise tries to, get right up on them to destroy them, and then the Enterprise is stopped. They receive a transmission from the Metrons, who are the inhabitants of the planet that was scanning them. There's basically like, you guys are doing violence, and we can't have that. But since you are dedicated to doing violence, we're going to take you, Captain Kirk, and the captain of the Gorn ship. We're going to put you on a planet. You guys get to do this in single combat, and then in the interests of galactic peace, we will destroy the loser's ship. Fight to the death. And as a fun fact, there's enough stuff here for one of you to make a weapon that can easily kill the other. So, Kirk has to fight this very large, very strong reptilian Gorn. Kirk is faster. He's also less physically powerful. So it's a contest basically of strength against speed and agility. This goes on for a while, and finally, the Metrons are like, hey, people still on the Enterprise, your captain's gonna lose this fight, so, because you might, like him or something, we're gonna let you watch him die. So the Enterprise gets to watch part of the fight. Spock figures out pretty much immediately what the weapon is. Kirk has been slowly working around to it, but there is sulfur, potassium nitrate, charcoal, and diamonds. Kirk also manages to find a piece of bamboo, which somehow, even though I think it's basically just a hollow tube, he somehow uses it to carry his stuff in. But these things, sulfur, potassium nitrate, and coal, can be used to make gunpowder. Kirk very roughly does this, and he makes a sort of orangey-looking gunpowder, which is, I think, not how gunpowder normally looks, because all the gunpowder I've ever seen has been sort of black or darkish gray. But anyway, that's not the point. So Kirk manages to basically make a small bamboo cannon using diamonds as bullets, fires it at the Gorn, wins the fight, and then he takes the Gorn's sort of, rock knife thing that the Gorn had been trying to get Kirk with, and he is about to stab the Gorn in the throat, and then he's like, no, Metrons, I will not kill the Gorn. And one of the Metrons shows up, and they're like, oh, that's surprising to us. You've demonstrated the advanced trait of mercy. I sent the Gorn back to his ship. If you want, I can destroy them. And Kirk's like, no, that's all right. And the Metrons are like, okay, well, good. You've demonstrated compassion and mercy. In a few thousand years, your civilization or species might be, smart enough and benevolent enough to actually come and meet with us. So that's the episode. The social justice element, I think, that's most prominent here is related to colonialism, intercultural contact, and these sort of zones of contact between different cultures or civilizations. This is, of course, a really, really important thing in colonial history, post-colonial history, what it means for an explorer, or explorer without the scare quotes, what it means for colonizers to meet people of other cultures, and what it means for people of those cultures to be met by those explorers/explorers, in scare quotes. This is very often a fraught space of contact, a fraught cultural zone, when you have competing objectives, competing ideologies, competition, particularly over territory. This can very often lead to conflict, and it can lead to a loss of cultural resources. So, in this episode, Cestus 3 is an Earth outpost. It's out just on the frontier, basically, of explored space that the Federation has explored, that is, in what they think is more or less a sort of terra nullius. That is a open space or open land. So terra nullius in early colonial history, that is European colonialism of South America, Australia, New Zealand, places like this, there was an idea that these lands were vacant, which of course kind of requires some mental gymnastics when you show up and there are indigenous people who are like, hey, we're here. And you have to then kind of say, well, those aren't really people. They don't actually count because they're not Europeans, or because they aren't industrialized, or because they aren't living in brick houses, or whatever metric it is that the colonizer uses to justify taking somebody else's territory and either driving them off it, or killing them, or enslaving them, or a combination of all three. Which is what happened in the Americas, it's what happened in the Caribbean, it's what happened in Australia, it's what happened to a certain extent in New Zealand, although the Maori actually did a really good job defending their territory. But these zones of contact in which the people of one civilization meet the people of another civilization, particularly when one of those civilizations wants to take the territory or resources of the other civilization, these are often very violent, very tense, even genocidal situations. So Cestus III is out there on this frontier of Federation space. The problem is, and so Kirk's first thought when the Gorns destroy it is, the Gorns have attacked us. They are invading our territory. The problem is, when they get down onto the planet, the Gorn captain essentially tells Kirk, that outpost was in our space. You invaded our territory. And so in this case, as McCoy says on the ship to Spock, could that be true what he said? If it is, we could be in the wrong. And this is the big sort of paradox of colonialism, right? This is the big paradox of this system where you go and you take somebody else's stuff, take somebody else's land, resources, etc., etc. You have to convince yourself that that is unowned or unused territory in order to justify that. Otherwise, it is just out and out theft. Now, from the perspective of the people who were living in that territory, it is out and out theft to come in and say, well, we're the Spanish, or the French, or the British, or the Dutch, or whoever, and this is ours now because nobody lives here. Like, if you are the people who live there, you might be like, point of order. So this is a big thing, and this is part of the reason why we have moments of colonial contact are so often characterized by warfare. I mean, the Spanish fought the Aztecs, they fought the Inca, they fought they either fought or allied with to fight against other civilizations. They fought everybody, or they allied with everybody and then betrayed them. In British North America, we had a series of what are collectively called the French and Indian Wars. King Philip's War, Queen Anne's War, King William's War, as well as what in the U.S. is called the French and Indian War, and globally is called the 7 Years' War. These were all colonial wars in the early colonial period. And that's not even counting the Indian Wars of the post-U.S. Civil War period, etc., etc. In early Australian history, there were wars between the Aboriginals and the British and Irish, since a lot of Irish were transported as well, but British penal colony. This is the thing. This is very, very common in zones of cultural contact where you have one group of people colonizing the space of another group of people. And while that dispute doesn't get settled per se, Kirk does at the end tell the Metrons, no, I don't want you to destroy the Gorn ship. We can talk, and through diplomacy we can come to some sort of understanding. We don't know that that happens because it never comes up again in the series, but presumably some diplomat or another is sent out to have a chat. But the thing that's potentially problematic here is that if Cestus 3 was an encroachment in Gorn space, if it was colonizing their territory, it's a little bit problematic that Kirk gets to be the one who's like, I will be benevolent. Because if that's the case, if we think about that in the context of other colonialist experiments, let's say the United States, because the U.S. is fundamentally a colonialist nation. We were built on stolen Native American territory. It's good for the U.S. to be like, we want to be benevolent to Native American nations. It's also somewhat problematic because that benevolence is built on conquest. It's built on, now that we have destroyed you and you pose no threat to us, we can give you essentially scraps from our table. And unfortunately, that's kind of not an inaccurate description of how the United States has historically treated Native Americans, how Canada has historically treated First Nations and Métis Canadians, how Australia has historically treated Aboriginal peoples, etc., etc.